Hi there, and welcome to episode 75 of the Analyst Brief Podcast, brought to you by the Cyberhood. My name is Simon Moffatt, and with me is ever its co-host, Mr. David Mahdi. Dave, how are we doing?
Hello, I am fantastic, Simon. It was amazing seeing you. Wait, was that last week or the week before? It's all running together at Identiverse.
A week or two back. Well, that's it. And plus, the World Cup has just dominated everything certainly everything in my world, at least. Obviously, analyst work permitting. But are you following the World Cup? Are you following it in any way?
Yeah,
shape, or form?
I was actually quite happy. So I would say I have like kind of a couple teams, as you know, like my family's from Manchester, so I gotta root for the motherland, England. But there's the country where I grew up in, which is Canada. So Canada absolutely is performing really well. They beat South Africa yesterday. So that's kind of rallying behind them. But it's just exciting to see the passion, Scotland and right, all the other teams kind of coming together as well. It's just such an exciting, like, globally bonding thing.
Absolutely.
It's like a whole other level than the Olympics,
It is great. I'm a huge football fan, so it's definitely all the different cultures, how people how they support their team, the different songs. Some have drums, some have banners. I love all that stuff. It's absolutely brilliant. Unless, of course, they're playing England, at which point I don't care about any of that stuff at all. we want to win, but I know it is a great thing. It's TV times are a little bit awkward for some of the matches for those watching in Europe, but other than that, it's a thoroughly great thing. And we're recording this at the end of June, so we've got at least 2 and a bit weeks to go until we find out who the ultimate eternal champion of champions will be, and hopefully fingers crossed it will be England.
It's going by fast.
Team of your choice, but it is exciting stuff, which is dominating a lot of discussions, as you can imagine. But I guess maybe for a second, maybe bring the sort of the topic back to what we discuss more frequently, which is identity and cyber and all that sort of stuff. And you mentioned Identiverse sort of week or two back. I guess maybe let's start there. It was certainly a 4-day event for those who haven't been, over in Vegas, which was a healthy 41 degrees, which is a little bit toasty.
Celsius.
We just indeed. Well, Europeans say degrees, and it's just Celsius anyway. But nobody uses F in Europe. But I guess the interesting thing really was 4 days immersive experience, all of that sort of stuff, where you don't need to sort of introduce conversations around what identity is and what access management is, and you're always pretty much into a relatively deep conversation early. I guess over to you. What was your sort of immediate sort of 2 or 3 minute takeaways from it from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I think the best part is seeing everybody, the networking, those like quote unquote hallway water cooler discussions. That's what I found super valuable, and generally that's always like the biggest thing for me at a lot of these conferences. I did a panel with Fido and Forrester just on agents and standards and what the analyst community is seeing, but specifically it was on consumer agents. Because, when you looked at the agenda, there was a lot of stuff on machine identity, which is obviously, as you know, that was like one of the things I'm very passionate about, that, it was getting a lot of attention with the NHI pavilion as well. And of course, agents. There's a lot of agentic topics there. But the panel that I did was on consumer agents, and we've talked a bit about that. I think that was interesting because we had Fido talking about stuff that, they had Google, MasterCard that donated stuff, specs, and then Forrester and kind of what they're seeing and how, we're kind of transitioning from like this whole bot management to this. So there's that aspect. But as I combed through a lot of it, it's good to see that there's a lot of focus on agentic and where that's going. But if we push that aside for a moment, there's still like those ongoing issues that we still have with human identity management that haven't been solved. And as you know, Simon, I mean, just because you and I have been a big part of our careers on the identity journey, buyers, sellers, and practitioners, and or investors as well. And, there's a lot of tech that's still very long in the tooth that I think there's some things we can repurpose and reuse, but there's a lot of stuff that I think we need to start evolving those conversations from, hey, like there's SSO and SAML. It's like, okay, that's cool. It's how old at this point. I think we're hitting this inflection point where the requirements to do machine and we've said this in the past, to do machine identity and agentic stuff, which are really one and the same, should be, that scale, the volume, the velocity is just like identity systems don't just work. They don't work in that time dimension. And that was my biggest takeaway, is that I think we don't need to destroy everything here, but I think we do need to have some fresh approaches. And I think for certainly the tech that's long in the tooth, we need to get that stuff on a very clear roadmap to this high volume, high velocity, high variety of identity future. And I think people have the vision and the messaging, but I didn't see it with the tech yet. Still, I'll just say this quick, like still discovery centric, and all of that. And even if I factor in Mythos and Glasswing into this, it's just like, I think we've demonstrated that the human element is not going to scale with machine. So I'm still walking away from this event, not having a clear picture of where the tech is going, right? Committed. But I think that the acquisitions that have been made, I think all of these things that all happen around Identiverse are there, from like, AppUX talking about what they're doing there, to Entro being acquired by Sailpoint, and I think some others that are out there. I think it's good that we're on that, but I think we're still probably a few years away to actually say, like, this is the frameworks that we're going to have. I'll stop there, but that was kind of my mostly on agents. Not a whole ton on humans, but yeah.
I sort of half agree, half disagree. I think, look, we definitely haven't solved the human thing. I think that's absolutely fair to say. There's a lot of human problems we need to work upon. I'm hoping some of those problems may become obsolete a little bit. By that I mean using AI within identity to accelerate access review, clean up RBAC and policy, do all the sort of usage versus assignment sort of analysis, which we can do. And if you use AI for those things, so it's AI within identity, you remove about 80% of those core human use cases, I think, which is a really, really important thing. And that does a couple of angles. I think it improves the sort of general security hygiene, but I think it also frees up productivity and effort to be spent elsewhere. Because we spent a lot of time doing a lot of donkey work with an identity around building connectors, access review, proofing, integration stuff, which in honesty, if you're a systems integrator right now, you'd be terrified, because in 2 years' time, a lot of that stuff will just disappear, because you will not need to do that anymore. So I think all of that will transition really, really rapidly. I think, absolutely the talk track was very agentic centric, a little bit, not a huge amount of specificity in there, really. A lot of repetition. I thought a lot of speculation and conjecture, and I just sort of don't even see this on those viewing on the black and white television. But I think it's really important to distinguish between some of the tactical things people are obsessing over a little bit versus the strategic concerns. I think there's a lot of tactical effort at the minute around MCP and RAG and agent discovery and quite short-term things, which, quite frankly, they will either disappear or become commodity. And then really you've got to start focusing, if you're an enterprise, what are the real strategic things you need to be concerned about? And we talked about attribution and intent over the years, having trusted interactions, whether that's B2B or B2C. You've got to sort your data out and prevent leakage, and analysis and integrity of the usage of data is becoming a real big deal. So I think you've got to zoom out a little bit if you're an enterprise and not get too obsessive about the small level things, which will hopefully within 6, 12, 18 months will become much, much more stable, and we'll have some better design patterns around what that looks like. So look, Agentic is dominated. I think there's still a lot to go there around what some of that looks like from a design pattern perspective. I think we've got to just look a little bit more strategically and be a little bit more ambitious as well. I think, there's a lot of, I guess, talk around the bits and bytes of Auth2 or whatever it is around agentic identity. But look, we need to be involved in the network guys. We need to be involved in the security operations guys. You need to be involved in the data guys. ethics, and just be a little bit broader and much more ambitious in these types of conversations, because AI isn't just a technology area which either identity can own or cyber can own. It's transformational across the enterprise. You need compliance, legal, you got your data science guys, you got ethics, you got all of that stuff has to be taken into consideration. So to me, it was a useful exercise, a good few days, but let's broaden the conversation a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to just say, just on that, just like tactically, even when I spoke to some practitioners, right, like on the show floor, they were just saying, one, it's getting very confusing because everyone's messaging is all starting to sound the same. And then, it doesn't, you have to really talk to the vendor and get a demo from them and actually say, like, what are like your most popular, like 3 or 4 or 5 use cases that you solve? And that usually then crystallizes everything. But, we all get sucked into having to use like cloud and then AI and now like Agentic, right? And we're all doing this. And it's like, with like Okta, and it's like, okay, I get it. They're like, we secure AI. I'm like, oh, okay. So you're doing prompt injection stuff. You're also like doing RAG stuff. You're also like, that's what that statement means. So you have to be careful what you're doing. So why I'm saying this, Simon, going back to what you were saying, I think there's an opportunity, that as identity, grows in the Venn diagram of cybersecurity, it is, very much overlapping with data security, as you just mentioned, with app security, with all of these things. Identiverse made a decision to have the NHI pavilion, which I think is great. It puts a spotlight on the topic and on the problems and on the vendors, and it gets those conversations going. Well, why don't they have that for like a data security pavilion or a SOC pavilion? You know what I mean? Like, have these pavilions. And if there's vendors like a Thales, for example, who offer services, across data security and identity and so on, they could be, maybe they have more of like a platform section. And the reason why I'm saying this is because, again, I'm putting myself in the shoes of a practitioner and going, well, if I'm coming in and I have a project on identity, I know I can go to like maybe the platform area of whose platforms. Maybe I go to the machine area where there's machine identity vendors. Maybe, I do want to talk about some crossover vendors that have capability of like maybe some data security, data classification, or like ways I can, as I'm governing the identity, understand based on the data that's in the system what they can access. Things like that. I think we'll do a good job in helping clean the mess, because that's a big part of why people read cyber research, why they want to talk to experts like you and others to help clarify all of this noise. And I think it feels very noisy to me this year. Exciting, but noisy.
It's fair. my real worry is those conversations are going to happen. Right? They're going to happen at the data security conferences. They're going to happen at Blackout. They're going to happen at RSA. They're going to happen at B-Sides. They're going to happen anywhere. And if the identity people aren't in the room, identity is becoming way more important. But if you treat it like a little thing that's separate, that sits under the CIO, and you do some infrastructure, that's how it's going to get treated. And I think those conversations about how you should secure agents, how you should secure data, how you should look at confidential computing, how you should look at security operations and forensics. If the identity person isn't in the room, those identity conversations are still going to happen, maybe not with the right people or with the right, the right direction there. So
spot on.
It's not a case of, we shouldn't have them. They're going to happen, right? And if you're not getting a broader church, a much more neurodivergent church around analysing this stuff, you're not going to be part of the conversation. And that, to me, that's a worry, because you then end up with, back to what you say, you end up with noise and conflict and discussion, which is sort of bouncing off each other, instead of being a much more inclusive. Okay, there's all the problems from the data side, the cyber side, the endpoint side, the security operations, forensics. How does this fit into MITRE ATT&CK? How do you measure it? So if you have all of that into the mix, you all just go together at the same pace, instead of it being like a little bit, they're whizzing ahead because identity is not working effectively, and they're sort of building out their own, concerns. And that to me is a little bit, or how I feel things are. It is noisy, and there's lots of like a bit of elbowing and a bit of confusion and maybe word wars and stuff. It's like we're not really having those strategic conversations with all the different stakeholders involved who have a real interest in how identity works, and not just Agentic, but Agentic, data, endpoint, SOC, B2C, privacy. How does e-commerce work with agents? There's a whole host of other sort of things happening, and because AI is working so fast, just back to your sort of earlier point there, this is going to happen anyway. So it's not a case of, oh, well, we can wait a couple of years and see how it pans out. It's like, if identity is seen as the blocker, it's either going to get steamrolled out of the way, or someone will just, develop in a different way. So,
excellent point.
Lots to take away. Lots of news, lots of stuff there to consider. You mentioned Sailpoint in the thing there. There was definitely a few vendor announcements, as always. Vendors like to sort of have that rolling thunder at every big conference. Let's roll out a new version, even though it probably isn't a new version, but like to roll it out anyway. And often things get a little bit. As an analyst, it's okay because you get all the briefings, you get to see what's happening. But I think so much release happens. I think if you are a practitioner, it can be quite difficult to see. Actually, that company was acquired, and those guys over there have just end of life something, which often happens quite quietly. Actually, these days, end of life of software. Anyway, so there's a lot of that happening, and there's at least 3 or 4 acquisitions happened in the space of about 2 weeks, which I think many people I was in conversation with, like, oh wow, I didn't know that happened, or I heard something, had it completed, had it not completed. So there's 3 I want to quickly bring up now and just get your sort of take. You mentioned Sailpoint, so I'm not going to introduce Sailpoint to everybody. Who's been around for about the best part of 20 years. Originally in that IGA space, evolved a little bit more into being more, I think I talk about sort of unified identity fabrics and trying to take those access request, access review, security posture management, continual compliance use cases into partner identity, into B2B, into different directions. A bit of NHI talk for them last couple of years. And they've gone into a definitive agreement, I'll bring this one up for those who are on the viewings, to acquire a company called Entro Security. So again, we don't really know the numbers on this. Word is probably somewhere in the hundreds of millions, $200 or $300 million, and essentially they've the intent to acquire sort of things. So it's probably going to happen in the next quarter or 2. We did a report on this on the Cyberhut last week. Again, Sailpoint trying to move away from IGA, broader identity security sort of narrative there. And I think it's quite interesting around not only, this isn't a sort of dig at Sailpoint, but I think a lot of vendors are now talking about, we do NHI as well, we do agentic identity as well. So there's definitely been a bit of a change for Sailpoint over the past 2 or 3 years around what types of identities they want to cater for. And part of the press release, essentially, they've acquired this company called Entro Security, and CEO Itzik Alvaz said in there, we had a clear mission really to look at the modern cloud, so sort of cloud centricity, credentials, NHI identity, doing that discovery aspect. And essentially, it seems to be a really complementary focus to what Sailpoint have traditionally done, looking at governance for humans. And basically saying the combined platform will provide discovery and credentials coverage, absolutely good. Deep context and human ownership attribution is definitely something we've talked about in the past around, look, whatever NHIs and agentic identities you have, you've got to get them, A, an owner, B, get them integrated into the joiner, move a leave process, and then looking at some sort of real-time stuff, whether it's usage or whether it's just-in-time permissioning. So bring you in here, Dave. It seems a bit of a natural evolution. I think, Sailpoint, there are a number of different NHI vendors I guess they could have looked at. It seems, they had some NHI stuff in the past. They've obviously sort of doubled down and sort of boosted their capabilities there. Any immediate takes from you?
No, I think this makes sense. This is coming not long after Cisco buying Asterisk. You can very clearly see, as you and I have been talking about for years now, since almost the inception of this podcast, that machine identity was the missing piece. And inevitably it is going to come that way. I think I'm glad, Itzik, I think was focused on that, because I think that was a really critical piece, and not over-rotating on agents, right? So even if we put agents aside and ignore them, we still have all these other like machine or non-human identities that need to be managed. And then, as you said, attributed, wrangled into that JML process. It actually should be JML adversary as well, right? As we talked about. So I think it was a good move. I think it's interesting the price points that these companies are going for, like 350 million and 200 million, it's interesting because I think in the machine identity space, like it's hard to become a platform that's just machine identity at the moment anyways, right? That could change, but it's very much seeming like the center of gravity are these like human identity companies that have quote unquote platforms, and some of them are portfolios that they say are a platform, but they're portfolios. And some of them may truly actually have like a platform where things are working off of a similar quote unquote operating system that they build off of, right? It's probably the latter more than the former, more portfolios. But I do think this is a good move. The chatter I heard at Identiverse, because this happened, I think just before, is that, you know, there's a lot more people that are actually looking at Entro now because it's under the platform. And, you know, that was the other thing, which was interesting. It's that there's so many point vendors that practitioners, again, going back to the noise, are overwhelmed. And when they are under or a part of, quote unquote, a bigger flagship, you know, again, I'll loosely say platform, then they're like, oh, this could be interesting. If I'm already a Sailpoint customer, is there an incentive for me to use, you know, Entro now? And A, what's the incentive? B, are they closing something? And I think there's a market opportunity, because I think if there are people who are POCing any of this technology and they were on the fence, right, this might actually shift things over to people saying, I'm going to use Sailpoint, or maybe I'll use Cisco, right? You know, but there could be others that say, you know what, we have Sailpoint, but we don't want to put all of our eggs in that basket. We're fine in managing a separate vendor because this is so critical. So that'll be the interesting thing. It's going to be, like as always, what is Sailpoint going to do with it when they are marching along? How is it going to change their strategy if it does? And is this the end of it, right? Because Entro kind of started out more on the secret side, and then they started broadening out more and more. So it'll be interesting to see exactly where they go, because I don't think that story's over yet.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely fair. Yeah, spot on. I think it's difficult because if you are a big company, public company, or a big private company, you have to be, you constantly got to show you're innovating and moving forward, which I think is always a bit of a paradox. Actually, if you're a public company, you want to be stable, predictive, be able to predict your revenue each quarter, each year. You know your addressable market. You got to be careful which addressable markets you're attempting to target as well. You can't be just picking and choosing. So it is difficult, but then equally, you want to be able to hire people and show you are progressive and not just a sort of legacy cash cow. So it is hard to continually add stuff in. I think, yes, absolutely, you can natively add features in. I think it's not that easy to add in whole segments, but it looks complementary. There's obviously, as we know, there are numerous different NHI, ITDR, ISPM vendors that all popped up over the last sort of 36 months. Some have had a lot of funding. Some clearly have a decent customer base and are starting to make some revenue. Probably, the profitability is probably questionable. Don't know this about Entro, of course, because they're private. But they've been around 2 or 3 years. They've also got a good story, good product, and they're doing some good stuff there. So it seems like a complementary thing. Again, interesting. Will this get rebranded and just become part of the sort of Sailpoint machinery? Probably, in all honesty. Will it just get sold back and cross-sold into existing Sailpoint customers? Another interesting one. Are they going to suddenly lead with this and whatever, the Sailpoint NHI platform? They're going to sort of go and get net new customers? Maybe. Who knows? You've got, I guess, the Sailpoint on-prem world that's migrating to the Sailpoint cloud, and you've got net new customers going into the Sailpoint cloud. Are they just going to maybe go for the net new Sailpoint NHI cloud and see where that takes them? Possibility, who knows? Well, but it definitely seems to be a decent strategic move for them. It keeps them fresh and relevant.
I mean, there's interesting points. A couple things there, right? So, I think if we look at Palo Alto, because they with the CyberArk acquisition and then CyberArk, picking up a bunch of other companies, including Venafi, right, which had some workload, CLM stuff, workload stuff, was really leading the charge on the machine identity narrative in the first place. That I think created a big, kind of bang, you need to do something now. And identity human and machine, is becoming like a cyber platform thing. Like, again, you and I have talked about. But what'll be interesting is, I'll just say from personal experience, because I've done this a lot, just being objective and critical and not saying, they just need to manage this. I have personally trained a lot of people who have been very used to selling human stuff on the machine identity market, right? And just like, whether it's, the pre-sales, the post-sales, the topics, the personas, all of that stuff, there's overlap. But what I've seen time and time again is that it's I don't want to say a different skill set. It's just a different subject matter area that's going to require, some of these main, let's just say, go to market and the Sailpoint machine to have to like pick up that domain knowledge. Now, obviously on paper, with what we can tell, reading between the lines, it's very likely that they'll also acqui-hire a lot of the Entro staff. Yeah. I would imagine. They did that with CyberArk and Venafi, and then Palo Alto with CyberArk and so on. And of course, they did have reductions, but that's, I'm not going to get into that. But, my point, Simon, here is that, I can see it maybe potentially being a lead topic. It's exciting, so they might use that. But like, are they going to maybe pivot those Entro people to like overlays where they come in and help, like, maybe the you know what I mean? Like, what I'm going to be interested to see is how they bring it to market, how they actually acquire it from a people, process, and tech perspective, and then what that's going to look like a year from now, because they're publicly traded. We could very much track that back to see like, what's the story, what's the narrative, and is this actually growing pipeline, and are they winning deals against others? I do think strategically they will. And I do think it's going to be very simple, where they'll just like probably do exactly what I said, because again, what I've seen, and I'm being very critical, like what I've seen before with certain teams, I'm not going to name companies, is that they may have this tech and then they go, like, I'm familiar with like vaults and this and that, but I know JML really well, I know IGA really well, but these are different concepts. And I might also have to talk to like a DevOps person, so
that's the bit I was just going to bring up. Actually, I think the integration is always a problem. I've been on both the acquiring and the acquirer side.
Yeah,
it's tough. It's tough. Each way you look at it is difficult. So you have the culture stuff, but the really big stumbling thing I think they will have to overcome is that persona. Because the teams and the buying persona, if you look at the RACI matrix, responsible, accountable, all that sort of stuff, people who buy and operate NHI isn't the same people who buy and operate IGA. Now, there's some overlap, some companies are different, big, large, whatever. Different organizations have different ways of doing things. But just generally, they're separate. Ergo, you have the NHI Pavilion, for example, at the Identiverse. It's just slightly different personas. And they measure success differently and have different needs, and they have a different set of skills. Ergo, they're different. You've got to sell into them differently. So I think that is the biggest. Is it an obstacle you can overcome? Absolutely, because you just said they're going to be acquiring a lot of really skilled people who've done this 100%. For 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, they'll get there.
It is different. Yeah. And will you end up with 2 separate departments in an organization, which I've sort of had and experienced that in the past, or do you want to try and merge and splurge and have everybody selling IGA that's on-prem, cloud IGA, NHI, NGA, Agentic stuff? It's a different way of thinking. So I'm not saying it's going to be difficult, unsurmountable. It will be difficult, and I think it will need a bit of time and effort. But yeah, I think from a feature perspective, strategic, not without its hurdles, I think, to consider. Having said that, if you're a Sailpoint customer, go and knock up your Sailpoint rep and say, give me a demo of this stuff, because quite frankly, they're probably going to be adding it into the cross-sell price list. And that's, again, knocking out any potential specialist NHI coming in there, because how many Sailpoint customers they have. It's a lot. Look at their SEC filings. They're just going to be able to go revisit all of those, like we've said on every sort of podcast where there's been an acquisition.
And I think if anything,
it's going to cross-sell back.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt there, but I was just going to say really quick. I mean, even if I just, we put a bow on this one, just for the time being, it's going to do, I think, what we've been saying all along. It's just going to continue to accelerate this. And if you are a founder at another NHI company right now, you're probably looking and going, how are we gonna, right? Like if I'm an investor in one of those companies, I'm gonna be like, so how are you going? What's your strategy now? Are you gonna partner with like who's left, right? You got Ping, you got Savient, right? Okta, Transmit. You've got others that are in the IAM playing field that don't have machine identity offerings or NHI offerings directly. They might have some agentic stuff or whatever. But like, what's your story here, right? So that is going to be next. So I think we can safely predict we'll see some continued M&A, continue, I think, on this podcast and, like have the discussions with like, okay, how's Sailpoint tracking? How's Cisco tracking on this stuff? How is Palo tracking?
But, and the other thing there, which you sort of slipped in without sort of noticing, is it's NHI, machine NHI, and Agentic. Because if you look at Entro, they do all, and then you have original NHI vendors who are also doing Agentic as well. So you suddenly, if you're an Agentic startup coming in, it's like, okay, you've got the PAM guys, the IGA guys, and the NHI vendors. They're all like, oh yeah, we do Agentic. So you've got everybody sort of running a bit like football again. Everyone's running into the box at the same time. There's no space for everybody.
At the same time.
So if you are starting up, you're thinking it's not the tech. The tech isn't the problem. And there was back to RSA. There's a really interesting panel at RSA actually around the tech's the easy bit. Going to market now is really, really hard because you need to partner. You need to have both technical supply chains and reseller supply chains.
Yes.
And you're going there, well, hang on. I've got 5 NHI vendors. I've got 12 who now say they do agentic security, 55 that do AI security, which is just whatever that is. A lot of that's going to just disappear rapidly, and you're going to be left essentially. I think this will happen with identity. Actually, you're left with back to information security, which happens to have identity as part of its leverage. So, like all of that stuff will potentially evaporate. But I want to quickly go on one last thing to wrap this one up. So I want to skip on.
I was just gonna say these, right? What came up on my YouTube feed, and I like to do this sometimes. I like to just watch like old videos, like old CES videos from 20 years ago. And actually, BBC, shout out to BBC Archive because there's some really awesome videos on there. I watched a video last night. It was 1998, and it was will phones. It was amazing, Simon. You need to go and watch it, right? But you need to be exhausted. You need to be really tired and sick of our industry, and then go and watch it, and like you'll just be like, oh yeah. Anyway, the whole premise was, will phones, or in the future, phones will merge with computers, right? And the reason why I'm bringing that up, is when you go back even to the early 2000s, we had digital cameras, we had mobile phones, and then we started to have these PDAs. Each one of them were clunky. Each one of them, even mobile phones, in a sense, you could argue, I mean, maybe not 20 years ago, but even just late 90s, they were still somewhat nichey. Like not everybody had a cell phone yet. That started building up, and certainly not everyone had a PDA yet. MP3 players, people were still using all those things. So anyway, my point is like all this tech was so clunky and fragmented. That's what it feels like right now. Like you can see very clearly that these things need to work more closely together, but someone needs to pull it all together. And, I think we're kind of at that moment in some of these aspects with machine identity where it feels like, yeah, it's there. I know you all do discovery. Cool, right? Like we need more than that. But I think we're still at this messy, fragmented, bulky, clunky solutions, and we're not like.
Yeah, I think just to wrap this up a little bit, I think it wasn't the tech which altered the mobile phone, that was the app. It was the app ecosystem that altered the mobile phones. People didn't want phones anymore. They wanted the apps, which was a totally different thing where you don't know the use of the phone as a phone anymore. I think just back to your point, it isn't these individual tech things, it's the information flow, which will join all this together. And if you're not thinking about information flows, I think we talked a bit about Palantir a few months back.
You did. I was going to say, you brought this up.
It's a much higher thing. We're not talking the strategic versus tactical. The tactical stuff will just best of breed. What integrates the best will disappear. What goes up then is sort of the information flows, and how you were talking recently about the sort of e-commerce thing, and if your service, your platform of selling, if it isn't sort of AI readable and integratable into the AI search engines, it doesn't exist. So it's like, okay, that's starting point one. And starting point two is basically being, allowing your service to be integratable to the agent world, because it might not be me, Simon, that's looking for a World Cup ticket. It's going to be my agent doing stuff. So you have to have your e-commerce environment agent friendly. And there's just all of those different stages of just making your information available in a much more end-to-end, visible, controllable way. And will it need machine identity and agents and IGA? Absolutely will, but it won't be in these little sort of old-fashioned pillars. It's going to be much more information.
And I think it's just a go-to-market's going to be key here. So yeah, I agree with you. But excellent points.
All right. Let's skip on a little bit for the acquisitions. It sort of continues this thread a little bit, but there's one that probably might have skipped under people's radars. A company called Cisco. I'm not going to introduce Cisco.
Cisco who are they? I don't know what they do. It's an interesting startup.
Obviously, they've evolved hugely, and we've touched on this a few times over the years about how they've changed their narrative to be more, I'm not saying they are identity centric, but they've added more identity into their narratives, and they made some acquisitions. They bought a company called Ort, they bought a company called Asterisk very recently, and on the AI side, they've also acquired a company called Galileo, which, for those who are watching on the screen, it is on here actually. It's a company called Galileo, which is like a AI SDLC startup, which is now part of Cisco as well. That was acquired on the 22nd of May. So they've been very busy, and long story short, Cisco owned WideField. The idea behind WideField is they're trying to sort of bring a wider lens to identity, so sort of broadening the field of signals and analysis there around identity security, sort of monitoring and the like. The spin on the press release is a little bit agentic centric, which is perfectly reasonable, I suppose, as you would expect. But again, just basically saying, look, it's more about just who's logging in, that sort of IDP authentication layer, what's happening afterwards. And basically what they're saying here is WideField's technology enables this telemetry from a wider set of sources to be utilized as part of the AI-driven security workflow. So I'm not going to dissect the entire press release, but just what I was sort of saying at the top of the hour there around, look, identity is much more than just OAuth 2 bits and bytes. We're talking about, in this particular environment or particular story, it's trying to enable the SOC, the Security Operations Center, which has gone through huge transformation with AI, and you now have agents running within the SOC, helping to do forensics, analysis, triage, ticket closure, and stuff like this. They basically say, look, we're going to take this WideField technology looking at identity behaviors, and that's going to become part of what they call the Splunk's Agentic SOC. So obviously Splunk now is part of the machinery as well. Cisco Identity Intelligence, Splunk's Agentic SOC, to assemble the session levels necessary for deeper analysis by security analysts. Now, that isn't talking about identity in OAuth 2, it's talking about all of the security analytics needing identity to look at forensics behavior. What is this identity actually doing? And so it's looking at it from a security landscape, not from the identity landscape, which I think is really, really interesting. WideField, not huge, been around 2-3 years. It's a good, I guess, sort of early exit for them in some respects. But again, I imagine they'll probably get rebranded as some part. And it already sounds like Cisco's got them lined up for this SOC function, which I think is it's interesting.
Yeah, I think a couple of things here. So I think even coming off the heels of the last two topics we covered, I was just jotted down, with just like all of it. I think if we were all flies in a strategy boardroom of Cisco or any of these companies, you could very much imagine that a lot of them are looking and they're going, AI is driving these strategies, right? 100% AI is driving these strategies. And that's I think it's a good thing, but there could be some like neutral and bad things in there too. That's fine. But I think it's either like getting ahead or not falling behind. You know what I mean? And then staying relevant. So I think it's those three things. It's like Cisco here is looking at like, how can we make sure we don't fall behind? We're like staying on par, but also let's find some opportunities where we get ahead. For me, having covered Cisco very closely for a long time, before and while I was at Gartner and even after, even when they bought Duo, that was like their first major move into quote unquote identity. That did do a lot in that sense. But, I just feel like when they bought Ort, to me, that was like the signal in time where things really started to change, where, it's like they brought on some really talented people. There's Matt over there and the team that I think have a very good vision of the future. And to me, that seemed like the big inflection point. But to me, it's the other thing it's a big topic, but I'll just mention, and I mentioned it earlier, is mythos. When you go back to the SOC, when you go back to, dealing with all this stuff, what mythos has proved is that, there is a, there's no limit now to vulnerabilities. You just assume that all of your systems are vulnerable at any time. You have, say, if you have the luxury of having mythos, you run a scan, you're always going to find vulnerabilities. So the notion of like that volume of vulnerabilities and the whole human cat and mouse, literally like patch game, doing the validation and all that, that is going to change. I've been having a lot of discussions about that. And what's interesting is like, I start to look at that flow in the pipeline, and now it's like we've blown up the discovery part of that. So if you look at Splunk, if you look at all this stuff, they're just going to have so much more noise coming to them. But the thing is like, do you need to patch something? Do you need to deal with something? And in lieu of that identity information and data, that's going to be something that I think everyone's missing. So I think here Cisco has a combination of like, let's get ahead, let's stay on par, and let's not fall behind by pulling in the identity information, because you also have CrowdStrike, who had a good presence at Identiverse as well, with acquiring Signal, right? They bought Preempt years ago, right? CrowdStrike really does have that continuous identity story. And so we can see all this kind of coming together. Mythos is in the background because I can tell you with full confidence, a lot of CISOs are thinking about that. What does exposure management, what does patch management look like? And identity has to be in that equation. And I think that's a good move in this regard. So I think it's all three of those: getting ahead, not falling behind, and at least kind of staying in line.
Do you think, though, the mythos thing, it sort of, in some respects, it sort of disappears a little bit. And by that, I mean, you're not going to be able to necessarily fix that by doing what you're doing today. You have to change how you think about things. And if everybody, all your software moves to CI/CD, you're not going to be patching anything. You're going to be continually releasing software anyway, every 10 minutes, regardless of whether it's a security patch, a normal patch, an RFE, or whatever. Right? That's just the sort of cloud cadence angle. Now, if you think about that and think about, well, CrowdStrike, these guys, it's almost like it's a leapfrog architecture, thinking, well, we're just going to go to the runtime here, and I don't really care what agents I've got. I don't really care who or what is accessing my high risk assets, data, whatever, internal stuff, external stuff, whatever it could be. But I'm just going to go for that runtime and just see what's accessing my stuff at runtime. I don't care where it is, where it's come from. And then you overlay with stuff like this, where you're looking at behaviors, all the telemetry, the signals, intent analysis, all the rest of it. It's almost a little bit like, back to the sort of football analogy, you're attacking the team, you're sort of allowing the counter attack because you can get back. You can get back because you've got really, really fast defenders, and they're going to get back, and they're going to solve this problem for you, instead of sitting there worrying, having all of your defenders sitting there patching everything. It's like, it seems a little bit yesterday.
You can never get ahead. You can never get ahead.
I do wonder if that becomes obsolete. You think, well, we're going to ship crap code. It's just the way it is. But what we're going to actually win is this runtime. It's the behavior. It's the intent. And I do wonder a little bit if Cisco has been a little bit, I don't know, quite almost sort of being a little bit presumptuous. We're going to stick this in the SOC because they know the SOC has issues with identity, and by that, yes, they're good at looking at network signals and micro attack, but they don't necessarily link those indicators of compromise right down to a biologically attributed person or an agent. I think that is where this will fit in for them. And again, they've got the network, so they're going to do all sorts of network telemetry there.
And then differentiating by attacking it from, like, I think again, it's runtime. That's a really good call out. And I think the notion of intent, because the challenge with the SOC is that there's a lot of information in there that's post. It's already happened. It's forensic, right? So, okay, cool. Like, we can understand all the AI models that can be brought to bear on that to help you, blah, blah, blah. That's a whole other narrative. But the thing is, like, when you get into runtime, that would imply like, we need to be able to catch this stuff as it's executing, right? Like as stuff is being encrypted, is that legit or is that ransomware running? Right. And so if you have an ability to like see it, monitor it, understand the trend line where it's going, i.e. intent, then you can stop it. So I think that's, I agree. And I think maybe they've also seen their swim lane and being like, well, if we go head to head against, I don't know, a ping, they have a total identity narrative. We have an identity narrative, but our big anchor point maybe with an organization we're targeting is that they already have Splunk. If they already have Splunk, we can add on all this other stuff and then say, if you use some of our identity, platform stuff now, that will enrich a deep investment you already have with us. And then they can start to take over and be like, you don't need to, invest more in Ping or invest more in Okta or whomever. So I see it as something where like, it's a good ecosystem play for them on paper, at least in this discussion we're having today. And maybe that's where it absolutely could go. So this one's interesting. I mean, it feels like to me, again, going back to the boardroom idea where there's all these like interesting vendors that are out there and you have these big platformers that maybe are sitting on some cash and they're thinking, we need to arm ourselves for the future. We need to make sure we stay ahead. We need to make sure we don't fall behind. And let's pick up these assets now, because it seems like a lot of these vendors are selling for like, I'll be brutally honest. I actually thought like Asterix, Entro, I thought they'd be able to sell for like at least double or triple that. And for the price points they're selling at, that's telling me that either the founders are going, I don't know if we can like stand on our own. Who knows, right? And these platformers are going, those three things I mentioned. AI is coming. We're going to think 2-3 years out. We need to have these capabilities baked into our core offerings. If we don't have them, we're going to be irrelevant. That's what this feels like to me, Simon, between what we said with Sailpoint, what's happening here with Cisco, what's happening with CrowdStrike, what's happening with Palo. And we still haven't even talked about like Microsoft. I don't know what's going on there. Google, right? Amazon, like those three actually have been kind of, other than Wiz, those three have kind of been like, at least in my perspective, I haven't heard much there. Anyway, I'll stop. There's a whole lot to unpack.
I think there is. I don't want to get into the pricing thing. It probably indicates a bit of uncertainty, I think, both on the seller side and the acquiring side.
Okay.
I think there's always conjecture around how to value something where you are in that journey. I think that in itself is complex to do. Look, none of these companies that have been acquired have been around more than 5 years. So they're on a 2, 3, 4 year journey. They've got funding. So there's always uncertainty. The VC funded or had funding of some sort. That needs to be paid back at some point. Does it indicate if you sell early that's a bad thing? No, maybe not. Maybe the company that's acquiring you has an ability to fulfill your vision. That's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. I think equally, the big guys always look around and see who's the other big guys buying, and they've got a lot of cash flow flowing through their books. So for them to go and make an acquisition of some sort, it isn't such a huge risk. Let's look if it's a Wiz or something, that's a different kettle of fish. But if you are talking just a few hundred, which obviously to me is quite a lot, it's not going to alter the balance sheet of Cisco one way or the other. In 18 months, whatever. It's just
excellent
even
point.
12 months. It's not going to change. It ain't going to change the revenue either, though, to think about it that way. WideField, for as good as their technology probably is, it isn't going to materially impact. They're not going to add 50, 100, 200 million in revenue to Cisco this year. Maybe next year, who knows? It gets repackaged, multiplies up, who knows? Yeah. So it can be thought of both ways, whereas the Wiz thing, that's going to start generating revenue the next week, right? Because they've already got the mechanics in place. So
that's true. They can absorb that.
Is part of it.
Yeah,
so it's part of the machine. Go on.
Go ahead.
No, I think this isn't really the last of these size of acquisitions. I think there's a number of businesses, a number of startups out there who are in a similar position. And I think unless you have a really clear go-to-market and a very clear partner model, I can see a lot of vendors exiting because I think there is uncertainty.
Agreed.
And I think in some cases, your technology will benefit from being acquired and just become part of a bigger platform of capabilities. It doesn't have to be the sort of cyber world either. We've seen the likes of ServiceNow and other the bigger platform providers going, actually, we could do the bit of ITDR, we could do the bit of security stuff or a bit of agentic stuff or blah, blah, blah. And it fits in nicely, and it'll change your narrative, and you can tackle the market differently. So without a doubt, I think the next, between now and sort of the end of Q2 next year, I think we're going to see, I would say at least between maybe 6 and 8 potential acquisitions across the broader identity space.
I just want to say one super quick thing to add on to what you were saying, and it was kind of what you brought up earlier with Sailpoint and Entro. Because it's an absolute, like, really strong point with, like, when you look at the size of Cisco, they bought Splunk for what, 30 billion practically, and then 350 million for Asterix, and all these other assets they're picking up. I get it, but what could be interesting is, you use that as that, like, nice shiny object that's in front of everything, and it could become a tip of the spear. And even though that product line may or may not start generating a ton of revenue directly, it may influence renewals, expansions, and net new product sales, either of that asset in particular or other assets. Because it's now it completes the picture, because now you're going to an exec at a large bank and saying, hey, we've been talking about this for a while. We now have, these we've acquired, and this is our roadmap to, include them. But what you're getting from us is a full picture of blah, right? And again, it goes back to that narrative of, like, I think many of them are smartly so thinking a couple of years into the future and going, this is a battle now for, like, humans, machines, non-humans, and agents in the cybersecurity world. And things are converging much faster. And AI, I think, is being that forcing factor in the market. And that's what we're seeing, I think. And it's exciting. It's exciting. But again, it goes back to, like, I think also why we're seeing a lot of confusion and noise in the space, because there's just so much movement, and things are moving incredibly fast.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end. I think there is uncertainty. I think there's definitely going to be a new paradigm around how we secure stuff. Whether it's data, people, whatever. And look, we all know these pillars of identity are all just disappearing. It's not become really don't become relevant anymore. So I think it is going to be these big guys who go look and think, actually, what information do I have? What signals do I have? What kit do I have? And try and create a new ontology, to use a topical word, to define something new. So. All right, maybe that's a good place to wrap up. I definitely there'll be more changes coming soon, and probably over the next 12, 18 months as things develop and things change, as they always do. And as you say, AI is the petrol on the fire to sort of make some of these things go a little bit faster. So I think there are definitely some more exits coming. So Dave, thank you for taking some time out and sharing your words of wisdom. Thank you to our audience, wherever you are in the world, for listening in. And again, please reach out with any comments or questions you want us to try and tackle. We can more than happily do so. But this has been episode 75 of the Analyst Brief Podcast. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.